Hello, Facebook. How are you doing? As you can see, I have two special guests with us regarding our grant info session here at noon. So if you would go ahead and take time and tag some entrepreneurs, business owners below, some professionals, anybody who's getting ready to start a nonprofit organization or for a profit organization, they probably want to make sure that they get this live. So be sure that you go ahead and take the opportunity to tag folks. My name is Ronnie West. I'm the president of the Greater Augusta Black Chamber of Commerce. We're going to go right into this grant info session here in a moment. I want to introduce my special guest first, but before I get there, let me do some housekeeping. Just so you guys know, I will be back live here this evening with Devonna Ramsey and also Leah Abney. We'll be discussing our Hit the Grind session that will be happening this Saturday. So you guys can learn all about that. Also, our pitch competition is still taking registration. So the opportunity for you to register to pitch your business, either whether it's existing or you're getting ready to get started, you have the opportunity to win $1,000. So that's a great opportunity to get some income into your business, or even just be able to start your businesses with licensing, LLC, and so forth without using your own funds. So you want to make sure you go ahead and register for the pitch competition. The link is at linktree.com/mygabc. So let me get right in here and let's get started with getting our guest announced. So first I'm gonna start with Patrice Davis. She is in the yellow, the lovely yellow top, just so you guys know. She is the CEO of GrantWorks. She is a grant management professional with 13 years of direct experience. She became adept at managing the complexities of government grants in various professional roles at large and small nonprofit organizations and academia. And as a federal employee, she has successfully managed primary and sub-awards from foundation corporations and 13 local and state federal agencies and sub-agencies, including the Center for Disease Control, Prevention, Corporation of National and Community Service, National Aeronautics and Space Administration, National Institutes of Health, National Science Foundation, U.S. Agency of International Development, U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, U.S. Department of Justice. These grants funded a wide variety of initiatives, including youth mentoring programs, global health projects, university research, and permanent supportive housing for single adults and families impacted by HIV/AIDS. Before establishing GrantWorks, she was the Senior Director of Federal Grant Programs Performances for Boys and Girls Club of America, where she was responsible for managing of a $54 million federal grant portfolio. She's a member of the Atlanta Black Chambers of Commerce, Grant Professional Association, Georgia Grant Professionals Association, and Government Contractors Association. GrantWorks core services include grant research, government grant readiness support, grant budgets, off-site grant management training, customized compliance roadmaps, sub-recipient monitoring plans, and site visit readiness support. So as you know, that's our first guest, Patrice Davis. I just wanted to introduce you guys to her. That is a powerhouse. We have two powerhouses for you today because you guys have been asking for the grant information before we get into these comments. Patrice, do you want to say anything before I introduce Charlene?
You can tell thank you for the introduction, Ronique. I look forward to speaking with everyone that's online and answering whatever questions I can answer for you, and just being a resource in case you need to pursue any grants in the future. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you for doing this live for the Greater Augusta Black Chamber of Commerce today. Now I'm going to introduce our next guest. Charlene Sanders is the founder and CEO of Totally Youth Support Services, an organization that provides full spectrum grant management and compliance consulting services for government entities, nonprofits, and corporations. Charlene's career spans 30 years with the State of Georgia Social Services Department, where she was responsible for overseeing contracts, grant settlements valued at $500,000 to $10 million. Charlene consults with organizations seeking grant funding for their projects. She assists them in navigating through the challenging process of grant award and management, from determining the requirements, developing action plans, monitoring the progression of the plan, and migrating risks to ensure the compliance is mandated to avoid the loss of funds. Charlene consults with organizations seeking grant funding for their projects. She assists them with through the challenges and process of grant management from determining requirements. Okay, I already read that, sorry. Charlene currently sits on the review panel for the Atlanta Mayor's Office of Cultural Affairs, where she makes recommendation approving proposals from community organizations soliciting grant funding for the arts community. She has the instrumental in creating value-added community resources for citizens of Georgia, including coordinating the Worker Trainer Initiative, a community resource outreach project, and self-sufficient skill building initiative from former social services recipient. She was also instrumental in creating transitional housing initiative for women with substance abuse and mental health challenges through the Community Partnering Initiative. For this project, she received an Outstanding Community Outreach Award. Charlene holds a bachelor's degree in social work from Albany State University. She's a dynamic leader, project manager, grant manager with a servant heart, skilled with the gift of building and nurturing innovative collaborative partnerships. As a lifelong resident of Georgia, Charlene enjoys reading, working out, and spending time with family and friends. Charlene, do you want to say anything to our audience before we get started?
Yes, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here and to be able to provide a resource to everyone. So thanks so much.
Okay, awesome. Now we're gonna get right here into these questions. And the reason why we just before we get into these questions, the reason why I wanted to get on 2 grant management specialists is because I know a lot of us always focus on getting the grants, successfully getting them awarded, but we don't think about the management after the fact to ensure that we are being responsible with the funds that we have received, to ensure we can even get more grants so we can have proof of concept and so forth. So that's why I thought it was really important that we get grant management professionals on here to talk about the grant info session today. And then ladies, if you want to add anything else in while we go through this conversation, please do. Does an organization need to obtain a 501c3, to get a grant? Is my first question.
So I can quickly take that one. So no, an organization does not need to have a 501c3. However, it's recommended that you seek a contractual relationship with a fiscal sponsor. So you're going to have organizations that service fiscal sponsors, and basically what they do is they allow your organization to gain the benefits of having a nonprofit or a tax exempt status. However, there are different layers to that contractual relationship. There are different types. But one of the things I do want to point out is if you receive a grant from, let's say, a foundation, and it's a $50,000 grant, because you have that relationship with that fiscal sponsor, that fiscal sponsor is going to more than likely take maybe 4 to 7% is the range that I've seen of the grant amount. So that's one of the things to consider, that there is a certain amount of each grant or even each donation that the fiscal sponsor would be able to take as sort of a processing fee. So no, you don't have to have one, but it is recommended that you get one as soon as possible. But until that, you can definitely seek a relationship with a fiscal sponsor. The final point I want to make is there is an organization called the National Network of Fiscal Sponsors. I recommend that you go to that site, read a lot of the information there to understand the kinds of contractual relationships you can have with a fiscal sponsor.
Okay, thank you for that. And then say the name of that organization one more time.
National Network of Fiscal Sponsors.
Okay, so National Network of Fiscal Sponsors. So guys, look that up and get that information. Now, Charlene, a question for you.
Okay.
What length of time should an organization have a 501c3 status prior to applying for grants?
Well, typically what I've seen, at least 3 years. They're most grant makers are looking at, have you had your 501c3 status for at least 3 years to even be eligible to submit for those grants. So typically about 3 years that you have your 501c3 status, or like Patrice said, if not, you're dealing with your fiscal sponsor and sharing that information, sharing that you have a fiscal sponsor. But if not, typically I've seen that about 3 years, what they're looking for you to have had your 501c3 status.
Okay. And just for anybody that wants clarification on what a fiscal sponsor is, can one of you ladies describe that, what that would be?
So these are, they're basically nonprofit organizations that they determine that they can sponsor another, it could be a community-based organization or even a person. For example, an artist, just an individual artist may decide that they want to establish a relationship with this fiscal sponsor, who again is a nonprofit. And based on the services that they offer, this nonprofit can accept donations on your behalf, process, not just the donations and of course the grants, but they may even, the services can be as extensive as managing all of your financial, obligations, not necessarily paying the bills, but sort of your accounts receivable, your accounts payable, just sort of serving as an off-site fiscal manager of your organization. So again, the services range, they can range. So it's recommended that you look into exactly what services you think you'll need. Go to that website about, the National Network of Fiscal Sponsors and learn more about what that entails. And so you can know what kind of service you think you'll need. If I can briefly follow up on Charlene's answer too, part of the reason they want you to have that 501c3 for X number of years is because you need to have at least 2 to 3 years of experience doing what it is you say you're doing. If you're proposing to, serve homeless youth, then what programs do you already have in place? What kind of services have you already provided this population? And so Charlene, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's really that history of serving or doing what it is you say you want to do with their funding that they need to see in 2 to 3 years is, sort of a baseline.
Right, that's correct.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So now, as you guys come into the room, you can go ahead and please tag other entrepreneurs, business owners. I know this has been a topic that we get from members and non-members for a very long time. So make sure you tag them so they can watch this session once they're available, or they may be on lunch. So be sure to go ahead and tag them. And then also, if you have any questions, we do have some live viewers, go ahead and drop them in the comments below. If we're able to get to them, we will. So let me go ahead and ask the next question and we'll go to Patrice. What are some of the documents organizations need to have to apply for grants?
Okay, so I'm going to do it from a foundation or private sector grant, and then I'm going to move briefly into government grants. But private sector grants, typically what they want you to submit with the application is going to be your 501c3 letter. They'll also request your organizational budget, your org chart, an up-to-date list of your board of directors and their affiliations, because they want to know what resources you have, what people you have on your board. From what I understand, they're now also looking to see if you have someone from the community you serve on your board. So that's something to make a note of. If you have audited financial statements, some will require audited financial statements. On the government side, particularly local government, you are going to need to have things such as your articles of incorporation. If you have any active memoranda of understanding with any community partners, they want to see copies of those. They want to, it's typically many more documents that you need for government grants. But while the threshold for government grants is higher in terms of documentation, government grants tend to be larger, and they tend to also be renewable. And of course, you can leverage government grants in a lot of different ways. So those are some of the documents but they of course can be quite a few more. For federal grants, a few specific federal forms are also going to be required.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you for that. I think we may have a question, but can someone put the fiscal company name in the comments? McNeil, if you could explain what your question is around the fiscal company in a question form, and then I can answer that possibly for you. I think I know what you're asking, but I just want to clarify. But before we get to his question, Charlene, let me ask you a question. What data should I collect about my programs and include in the grant application?
I'm sorry, will you repeat that again, Ronnie?
What data should I collect about my programs and include in the grant application?
Data around the services that you actually are providing. Say for instance, if you are serving those in the homeless population, then you want to have data showing what you have done for them. Like if you feed them, how many you feed a month, or if you provide other general services for them, housing services for their children, just keeping up with all of the data around what you have provided and what you have done in those particular areas where you are serving. So you will be able to show statistically and, around your data about what you have actually done, and to be able to prove what you have done and have it written and have statistics around showing just the expansion of your services from all aspects of it.
Okay. Thank you for that. Patrice, what's the difference between a grant writer and a grant manager?
So Charlene and I think we met talking about this. She and I vibe on this all the time. So a grant writer is the person that manages the pre-award side of your grant, of the grant process or the grant life cycle. A grant writer is the person that is going to write the grant. What does writing mean? It's not just writing. It is doing all of the research on the population you serve, any issues around the population you serve, research, making sure they have all the information about your organization and your programs. They may also help you develop your budget for that grant application. And of course, they're meeting with you to, get more specific information to be able to write the grant as well as possible. And of course, there are numerous revisions. So that's what a grant writer does. They handle all the pre-award side. A grant manager can do many of those things on the pre-award side, particularly if the grant manager has grant writing experience. But they also, once you receive the award, they're reading through all the terms of your award to make sure you're compliant. So a grant manager reads the award, the actual award agreement. They are the ones that set the schedule for your reports. So when you should have your reports, they may also work with your program folks to make sure you're, collecting the data that you should be collecting that you'll need to report on. And they're also making sure you stick to the budget. So for grant, if a foundation gives you 100,000, you should only use it for, the program director's salaries. You must only use it for your program director's salary. You can't use it for anything else. And so the grant manager works with your finance or accounting people to make sure you adhere to the requirements of the grant. And it's really important to understand that your grant manager is sort of your in-house person to ensure you are compliant and can remain eligible for future grants from either that organization or others. So a grant manager is looking at the full picture and making sure you do what the award says you should be doing with the funds.
Okay.
And if I can add something to that, Ron, this is another thing that Patrice and I have discussed many times. There is a difference. And I think a lot of times some organizations want interested in the grant writer actually doing the grant compliance components. Mm-hmm. And really, it's really totally two different things. Mm-hmm. Because if you have a grant writer, their responsibility is to write and make sure, complete those applications to submit for you to get grant funding. So once you take them off of their course, to try to put them over on the compliance piece to manage it once you have actually been awarded the grant, you're taking them off of their post of writing. So now they're having to switch gears and put on another hat because they're really totally two different things. Sometimes they kind of slide together, and a lot of organizations want to use you in the dual role. And when you do that, just keep in mind that when you take your grant writer off of the post of writing and to slide over into the compliance components, then they're no longer writing and submitting those applications for you. And it's not easy trying to juggle both. So there's a clear difference, but I think a lot of times organizations really try to tie them together. Mm-hmm. And so it's not really a good idea to do that. So it's good to try to keep them separate and understanding they're totally two different components.
Okay. Yeah. And I think the biggest thing to understand is just to make sure that you understand the difference between a grant writer and a grant manager. Two completely different components, like Charlene has pointed out and Patrice has as well, and that the writer is pre-award and then the manager is post-award. Mm-hmm. So you want to make sure that management process is in compliant with that particular grant. And you really want a manager that has the professions and the, skill set to manage that grant so that you're in compliance so you can get more grants. So you probably don't want, like Charlene just said, want your writer to go in that compliance road unless they are doing both for some reason. But I could just imagine trying to do that would probably be very overwhelming. And I wouldn't want to do that. If I'm focused on grant writing, I would rather focus on that and, you know, the pre-award. And then if the management piece, I can imagine you want to stick in the management piece and just focus on that compliance piece there. So thank you for definitely explaining that, because I think that definitely helps to clarify some things, especially when it comes to the grant cycle. Now, let's get into that conversation. So Charlene, what is actually a grant cycle? Or can you explain or break down the grant cycle for us?
Well, I look at the grant cycle, I look at it in 4 phases.
Okay.
So number one, and I'll just go through the 4 phases first, and I can go back and kind of talk a little about it. Number one, you need to read the document to understand what needs to be done. Then you develop your processes and procedures in place, and then you monitor and track, and then you have your reporting. So when you're looking at your document, you're reading it to get an understanding of specifically, you know, what I need to do. If, for example, to stick with the homeless family, they may say, we want you to make sure that you feed 100 homeless families a day, provide at least half of them provide housing, at least half of them provide employment opportunities, etc. So when you read through and get an understanding of it, clearly you know what they want you to do. Then you look into, well, how will I feed the 100 people, 100 homeless families? How will I provide housing support for them? How will I provide the employment opportunities? Then I need to partner with organizations or companies that will hire. I need to partner with persons that can provide the housing. I need to partner with the food bank that will provide the food. So you are building those processes and procedures out and connecting with your partners to make that happen. And then as you're making that happen, then you're starting into, and I'm giving you a quick version of it, then you start moving into monitoring that. Being able to monitor how many families are being fed, and that you can document that, and that you're monitoring who's bringing the food, and that they're actually bringing it every Tuesday at 7:00, and that, you know, working with the housing opportunities and making sure they need whatever resources to get in the home that has been provided, etc. So you're monitoring those pieces, and then at the end of the day, they're normally asking for reports to be able to report that data. You have to have been tracking and documenting and keeping spreadsheets to be able to report at the end of the day what you have actually done, and document how many families you have served, whatever the specifics are. So that's kind of like quick and dirty, but those are the 4 components of the life cycle. You first clearly understanding what they want to do, reading your documentation, building processes and procedures so that you can make that happen, then determining how you're going to monitor that to be able to validate what has been done, and then your reporting at the end.
And if I can briefly add to that too, that if you imagine the grant life cycle as a circle, so a lot of what Charlene just described definitely applies. So the life cycle starts also before then. It's the actual application process. It's the, you know, and all the pre-award things that you need to do. It's the management, and of course the reporting and the closeout. So just imagine it as a circle. Pre-award includes several steps, post-award includes several steps, which is what a lot of what Charlene was describing. Then of course the reporting, and then of course the closeout. Reporting is something that can be done all along. Some funders want monthly reports, some want quarterly reports, some only want just one report every year. But definitely there's a closeout process, particularly as it relates to government grants, which is my expertise. And so, you know, the closeout process is really, really important for that. So just imagine it as a circle, pre, post, closeout.
Okay, awesome. Now, what does it mean to be compliant with a grant, and what does it mean to be compliant with a government grant? So I guess it sounds like a private grant and then a government grant. What is the compliance there? And I think maybe Patrice, I think the question is now for you.
So compliance with a private grant is, so it all, again, it starts going back to what Charlene was saying. It starts with your award. So if you receive an award from the Arthur Blank Foundation. In the notice of award, they'll say, we need you to only spend this $250,000 on these things that you submitted in your budget. That's a part of compliance. You're complying with the financial requirements. We need you to submit quarterly reports, and in your when you submit quarterly reports, we want these things as your supporting documentation. That's the compliance. And then there may be some other things that they may require. That's actually compliance with a private grant, a foundation grant, or a grant from a corporation. Government grants is a different animal. So compliance with the government grants requires, number one, complying with the complying with the terms of the award, just like you do with private grants, but there are going to be more stipulations. You need to know a little bit about, not a little bit, you need to understand federal guidance. So government grants, all federal grants are guided by something called uniform guidance. If you go to grantsworks.com, if you go to my blog page, I write quite a bit about uniform guidance, 2 CFR 200. For those of you in this world, that definitely sounds familiar. You also need to be compliant with the program requirements. So the HUD has several subdivisions, and in those subdivisions are a number of programs. Those programs may say, yes, 2 CFR 200 or uniform guidance is sort of what you need to follow, but this particular program also requires you to collect information about, collect some other information that's not required in, federal guidance. So you have program requirements, and then you also have the terms of your award. So it is definitely, government grant compliance is a much more in depth, and is another reason why, to Charlene's point, you can't have your grant writer trying to manage your grant, especially a government grant, because there's so many things that you need to be aware of. It also requires working with your finance people, making sure they send you reports every month, or they can help you prepare whatever financial report is due quarterly or every year. So working with your HR folks to make sure that there are codes in place to charge a certain portion of that particular person's salary to the grant, if there is a person assigned to that grant. So government grant compliance is much more complex, and again, that's my background and my specialty. So I'll be more than happy to speak with anyone who may be interested in learning more about that.
Okay. Thank you. Now, what are some sites I can use to search for grants? Charlene, you have any suggestions on sites for us?
Well, as far as sites to use, I think Patrice could better
Okay.
for us
No problem.
research side, and that's not necessarily my lane, so I think she would be better with answering.
Okay.
So I have my little list here. So I'm going to list about there are quite a few of them, but so I'm going to start with a few. So there's grantsalert.com. There's, of course, grants.gov for those of you looking into federal grants. There's grantstation.com, Youth Today, youthtoday.org, Grant Siren, grantwriters.net, Grant Watch. There are quite a few, and of course, you have the big players, Philanthropy, News Digest, that might have some grants, Nonprofit Times. So yeah, definitely. And then that's one way. Now, another thing you can do, of course, is go to the Foundation Center, and they'll have the list of different foundations around the country. And then you may need to go to each one of those foundations and find foundations that that typically fund the services that you offer, and start building those relationships with the foundation contacts there, and just find out about their grants, just understand what the eligibility requirements are, and again, start building those relationships with those foundation contacts. I have to point out, however, that the way you approach a foundation is going to be completely different from the way you approach a contact for a government grant. With a government grant, there's a wall there. There can't be any conflict of interest or even perceived conflict of interest. So that relationship building it's definitely not the same. It's pretty much clarifications around the instructions in the application that you can engage government grant contacts about, never ever about, any of the other things that you may engage in with foundation contacts.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Thank you for that information. Now, I did want to say, did you cover any federal, like how to find federal grants in that list?
Yes, grants.gov, but
Okay.
if you go to there are a couple of things. So if you go to grants.gov, of course you can search. Some people are not sure yet how to use it, but I do have a replay of a webinar that I did back in April. It's 1.5 hours. I basically go into a teeny bit of the history of federal grants. I show you how to search for grants on grants.gov. I show you what to do before you go to grants.gov so you can find grants that are specific to the services you provide. Because if you go right now to grants.gov, there are probably about 22,000 grants on that site. And no one wants to keep clicking, going, to find the information that you want for your organization. There is a strategy that I use, and that's actually in the webinar. So it's a replay, and you can access it on grantsworks.com, or you can go to my Facebook page. Right before this session, I posted a link to it. It is a replay, it's a paid replay, but considering how much information you're getting in 1.5 hours, that's all the audio and 40 plus slides, it's definitely worth it. So
okay, awesome. And I did, so anybody that's on the live or watches this later, I did post Patrice's latest blog right before this on our Facebook page. So you can also access her information from there. So that way you can get in contact. But I will put in the comments after the live. If you can send me the list of sites you just sent me, I'll put that in the comments. I also will put Charlene and of course Patrice information just in case you want to reach out after we get off the live. So Charlene, next question is for you. Or if we need to throw it to Patrice, just let me know. Should I put a grant writer in a grant application budget?
A grant writer in the grant?
Yes.
No, a grant writer service would not be in the application budget. A grant writer service is totally separate. I mean, it's just a service that you pay for. You pay the grant writer to write the grant. The grant funding that you are applying for is not to be used to pay the grant writer. You would need within your organization to come up with, to try to create a budget for, come up with something reasonable, get with your grant writer and try to come up with something reasonable payout or payments that you can pay them to write the grants for you. But that is a service that you would pay for that is not included in the budget for the grant that you're writing for.
Okay, thank you for that. Why do grant writers charge so much? So Patrice, can you answer that question? Why is it so much?
Yeah, so I'm gonna try to be as brief as possible. Remember, when you find that grant writer, as I was explaining earlier, they are learning as much as they can about your programs. They're learning as much about the industry, for lack of a better word, that, for example, if we're going to use homeless again, they need to get statistics about the issues around homelessness, maybe in Macon or Augusta. So they need to research that information, meld it with what your services are, what your organization is offering, and put that in a compelling narrative that's going to make the funder decide, this is the organization I want to fund. So they need to do research. They need to, of course, maybe sometimes speak with your program managers to learn some things about the program that may not be available on your website. There are going to be a number of revisions, and sometimes they'll work with your accountant or your finance person to help them build the actual grant budget. So it's a very extensive. And it's a grant writer. My hat's off to them. I do grant writing as well, but it is a very involved process, and no one should ever think that they're just writing. They have to take a lot of information and make it compelling.
Right.
All right, thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
So I do want to ask another question. With more of understanding, like if I'm trying to get awarded a grant for 300K, how many or how, what does the grant writer has to write for in order for me to get that type of award? I think that's a good question to ask.
So the most important thing is to look at the requirements for the application. And sometimes the funder may say, we are going to award $300,000 and your organization can use it for general operating funds. That's great. That means you can use it anywhere you think your organization needs it. However, the funder may say, we're going to give you $300,000, but you must only use it for your program director's salaries, or for salaries plus supplies plus, I don't know, some other thing that's program specific. So your grant writer is then going to basically, as they're writing everything else they need to write about the grant, some of the other things such as, the executive summary, the narrative, there's sometimes a section called a budget narrative. And in that budget narrative, they can say, okay, this is how much of the 300,000 we would use for our 2 program directors. We would, and this is their background, and this is why they're qualified for, let's say 50% of the 300,000 be used for their salaries over the next year. We would use 20,000 for these specific program supplies. And then of course, write a narrative about why those particular program supplies are going to be the best for that program. And so basically that's what the grant writer is doing, writing what's called a budget narrative, again, to make the whole thing compelling. And that's even stuff that they have to research. For example, once I wrote a grant, once I actually had to do a budget narrative for a professor at Georgia Tech, and some of the things that he wanted in the budget, I had no idea where to even begin. So I had to keep researching to understand, okay, what is the cost for one of these? And how can I write a compelling narrative for this thing? So your grant writer is constantly researching to make sure that they can write something that makes sense and is compelling, from general program description to the budget narrative.
Okay. Yeah. And then let me also ask this question, because that was a good breakdown, but I was trying to make sure that I think you had stated earlier in our conversations that if somebody's working to get awarded 300K, usually the grant writer will write for more, because usually the percentage of approval of the grant.
Yes.
What is the percentage of approval?
Okay. Yes. So say, for example, that's a great, so thanks for asking that question or clarifying that. But basically, if your operating budget is $300,000 a year, the grant writer is typically going to write, or at least going to pursue 3 times that, because there's typically about a 30% win rate for the grant. So that grant writer is probably going to try to pursue over a 1-year period, or however, whatever the time frame is that they're working on, hopefully about at least 6 months, about 900,000 to $1 million, with the intention of getting about 300,000. So basically they try to align it with the operating budget by aiming for 3 times that.
Okay. Thank you for saying that. I think that was very critical that we just get that point in too. Now, Charlene, and we are getting a couple questions from the audience. McNeil, I'm not sure I understand the 1, clear understanding, 2, building process and procedure, 3, monitoring, 4. We may have to, can you explain a little bit more of that question? And then we'll get that answer. Does anybody, before I get into the next question, does anybody know how much a grant writer usually charges?
It depends on, for the grant writers that I've dealt with, it depends on the complexity of the grant and how long it would take to write it. And they can usually look at an application and say, okay, roughly it's going to take me 4 hours to write this, and this is how much I would charge you. Or a government grant, they may say, wow, this is really going to take about 10 to 12 hours to really pull all of this together. So it may be a little more. So it really depends. Or like Patrice was saying earlier, those foundation grants, or not as much, a lot of them are not as much. You may say $10,000, $50,000. It may not take as much to write those as it would for full-blown federal application. So it depends on how long it takes, and then and they usually charge per hour. So if I charge $125 an hour, if it takes me 4 or 5 hours, that's, it's pretty much how the rate is done for the grant writers that I have worked with.
Okay.
I want to add something to that.
Yeah, so federal grants, typically, federal grants, I've seen it, especially if it's like a National Science Foundation, NASA grant, or National Institutes of Health grant that's very technical, you're looking at a minimum of about 3,000, 3,500, and you know, and if you come and you need it done in 3 weeks, that's going to push that price up, because that person's going to basically have to remove everything off their schedule, because not only are they writing, they're also going through, they're reading that 40-page solicitation. And then they're reading that 40-page National Science Foundation solicitation. Then they're making sure you're set up properly in grants.gov. Then they're also, you know, making sure they understand everything they need to know about the technical details and what you're applying for. Then they start writing. Once they start writing, they start working with your, so it's a lot. So, you know, what I quoted is on the low end for a federal grant, but if it's something that's technical or something that you're asking the grant writer to do in a very short amount of time, just know that they're removing everything from their calendars to do it. And that's why grant writing is something I don't do often, because it's something that I know I won't be able to focus on other aspects of my business, because it's that entailed, it's that detailed.
Right.
And let me add something else, Ronnie. For there are some individuals who feel comfortable with writing the grant themselves, and you say, well, you know, I feel that I can do this, I can write this, and some of them write very well. And I've seen some organizations where it's like, okay, I have written this grant, but what they will do is then pay for a grant writer to review it or tweak it for you, and the fee may not be as much, you know, and they will charge you to take it and massage it and make it a little better or tweak some things for you, and you can pay for that review service, which may be a little cheaper than getting them to write, especially if you have a person that feels comfortable and with writing grants. Because I've seen some individual organizations have done well with writing grants, so we'll have a grant writer to come in and do that piece for them.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. You know, Charlene, that's an excellent point that Charlene made. In some instances, what they'll do is pay me to just basically manage the application submission process, review it, but also make sure that, you know, there are a lot of, you know, different websites and things you need to have for a government grant, specifically federal grants. And so they will pay you basically to manage the application submission process. So that's something else to consider, to Charlene's point.
Okay, good. Now, just one last question, and I want both you young ladies to give out your information so people can connect with you if they have any additional questions after the live. But we did get a question from the Facebook Live. Just kind of, have you seen, or, you know, Charlene or Patrice, have you seen a lot of grant opportunities for veterans and small businesses? Veteran or disabled veteran small businesses? What's the question?
So I think, and I think what this may be touching on, it's because they're looking for grants for veteran and disabled veterans small businesses. There could be two things that this the person's asking about. Are they looking for contracts, which is different from, of course, grants? So just to briefly touch on this, so if you are a veteran-owned or disabled veteran business owner, there are many opportunities for you to get a contract with, you know, maybe the state government, your local government. And one of the ways you can do that is to pursue certification through the Small Business Association. Small Business, SBA, I don't remember what the A stands for. And then, and so then it makes it easier, I wouldn't say easier, but of course that certification will elevate your eligibility, so to speak, for small business opportunities or contracts as a veteran or disabled veteran owned business. Another thing to consider, so I have seen, you know, I haven't really seen a lot of grants for veteran-owned businesses. I'm sure there exists now. I also want to point out that there are grants out there for businesses, but I find them less frequently. Most of the grants that I come across are grants from foundations or government entities for nonprofit organizations, not necessarily businesses, but they do exist, because one example is the Small Business Innovation Research SBIR grant that's offered by 14 different federal agencies. And that, of course, is to fund innovation. And if you have some kind of innovation that aligns with any of those 14 agencies, what they focus on, that is something to consider. But I haven't seen many instances where they have a preference for veteran-owned businesses.
Okay, thank you. Any things you want to add to that, Charlene?
Well, if they're asking about grants for veteran services, another thing I was going to add when I shared about writing the grant yourself and having the grant writer to edit and review it for you. In some instances, I've seen where some organizations have utilized grant writers to do the research for them. And I don't know if they're asking, you know, are there any veteran opportunities, grant opportunities out there? And if you're not comfortable with that, there are some grant writers that charge for just the research component. And they'll research for you and say, okay, here are 4 or 5 opportunities if you think this worked for you. And then you may want to go on and write the grant yourself and then come back around and let someone edit. That will be another part to it. But I think, you know, what the person is asking for, I'm thinking if they're asking if there are any veteran opportunities for grants, it's back to what Patrice had shared earlier when she gave those lists of places where you can go to look, and then you go in and you search for veteran grant opportunities, kind of thing.
Okay. So yeah, so it sounds like if you know, so and then we had another question, but yeah, make sure if you join the live after we get off, make sure you go back and listen to the beginning of the live. We will repurpose this on YouTube, but yes, you can get grants for for-profits and nonprofits. We did cover that earlier on in the live. Also, with the grant writer, kind of Charlene and Patrice was making the point of, you can also pay the grant writer to research for particular grants for you. So you kind of want to find a grant writer that, if you're looking for a specific grant, you probably want to find a grant writer that has experience in writing for that grant, because they probably know how to find those particular grants. So that will hopefully help you guys. And then we will send out an email to the members just with the contact information for Patrice and Charlene, and then also some grant writers, so you guys can get that information. And then we'll also repurpose this video to the members and non-members. You'll have that information as well. So ladies, thank you so much for this live today. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule and all that you do for the grant management process, because that is such a critical step of the grant life cycle. So I appreciate you guys for spending time with us today. If you could give the followers and the listeners for this podcast your information right now. Patrice, if you want to go ahead and give your information, and also drop it below in the comments already, guys.
Yes, a phone call coming in there. So again, the name of the company is GrantsWorks, and GrantsWorks provide a range of pre and post award services for nonprofits, businesses, and local government agencies. So we offer services such as offsite grant management, site visit readiness, of course, grant compliance, and of course, grant application, grant research, and grant writing. You can find us again, grantsworks.com, and on Facebook at GrantsWorks, and of course on LinkedIn on GrantsWorks. Visit the site and read our blog and learn, hopefully you'll be able to learn some more about the world of grants. Thank you.
Charlene, if you could please give us your information, contact information.
Yes, I'm Charlene Sanders, and the name of my business is Totally Youth Support Services. And I'm on LinkedIn. My website is www.totalyou, that's TOTALYOUSS.com. And you can reach me at 678-472-8033. And I'm also on Facebook, Totally Youth Support Services on Facebook and LinkedIn.
Okay.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, ladies. Make sure if you want to connect with the chamber, go to www.mygabc.org. You can follow us on all social medias at Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at MyGABC. And remember, we are one community and one voice, and everyone have a great day. Thank you, ladies. Have a good one.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.